Welcome to Reversing Hashimoto Show. I'm your show host, Dr. Anshul Gupta, the world expert in Hashimoto's disease. I help people reverse their thyroid conditions by making personalized functional medicine plans. You can work with me with any part of the country now by making virtual functional medicine appointments. To book an appointment, look at the show notes. In this show, I am going to get experts from all over the world who are going to share latest information that will help you to reclaim your life back from dreadful thyroid disease. So welcome here. And we have with us today Dr. Rajka. Welcome over here.
Thanks for having me on this summit. I'm super excited to spread the message that healing is possible.
Absolutely. And I think, we have a lot to cover during this conversation that we are going to have. A lot of people will be looking forward to it, but let me first introduce you so that people are aware of who you are and what you do. So Dr. Rajka has been successfully leading families to optimal health for over 2 decades as a board certified family medicine doctor, from delivering babies to managing family care in the clinic and hospitals. She is now exclusively a leading functional medicine consultant certified by the Institute of Functional Medicine. She is an international speaker, facilitator, and mentor to practitioners and has trained dozens of practitioners one-on-one via her online mentorship and more recently as a mentor for IFM. Dr. Rajka has patients who travel from around the world due to her renowned expertise in autoimmune diseases, autism, nutrigenetics and methylation, digestive disorders, cognitive decline, mold toxicity, and bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. Her track record for success speaks for herself. Having overcome 2 autoimmune diseases along with multiple symptoms gives her first-hand knowledge and empathy for the challenges that face her patients. As a woman and an entrepreneur, she is passionate about empowering women, leaders, celebrities, and CEOs to optimal health via a comprehensive functional medicine approach, which incorporates high-performance coaching. Her ultimate goal is to have these women empower their families and their tribes to optimal health. She sees patients at the clinic she founded, Simply Health Institute, outside of Chicago, Illinois, as well as educates clients in group online programs. Wonderful, Dr. Rajka. Welcome again over here. That is a great bio that you have over here.
Yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction. And again, for having me. Like I said, one of my missions, especially since we've entered this very uncertain time of where it pays to be healthy so we can survive, all things that come our way, is to just spread the word. So thanks again for hosting the summit and having me on.
This summit is a hope, for a lot of women so that they can recover from this dreadful disease called Hashimoto's. And what I came to know is that you yourself, fight through this Hashimoto's disease. So if you don't mind sharing your story, how you got Hashimoto's and how you got over it.
Yeah, so all of my 20s, I'd have to preface with saying, there was this low-lying level of fatigue that got worse and worse and worse. And to the point of where my peers would make fun of me when I'd fall asleep. I fell asleep at a rock concert. And for those that know, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's in my hometown of Cleveland. And I was invited by a girlfriend to go, and I fell asleep mid-concert. It was just that level of fatigue that is worse even than what I would have suffered during pregnancy. And so people who have been through a pregnancy know that's pretty profound. But then even worse yet was having my peers deem me as lazy, or even when I was dating my now husband, he thought I was being lazy when I slept 10 hours instead of needing 8. And that fear of going to a physician, can you imagine a physician being fearful of seeing a physician? Because I know how they would label me. My TSH, like many of your listeners, was in that 3 to 5 range. No one bothered to then look at antibodies or care about them. And what's ironic is medicine is progressing. I just looked at the American Academy of Family Practice just released an article that said, even if the TSH is not elevated, that if someone has antibodies, that they would warrant treatment. Hallelujah. It's finally come to this time. But, back then, I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to go in and have them say, you're just depressed. And that's what we were taught in medicine is if someone's fatigue does not have an identifiable cause, you should deem them depressed and have them entertain an antidepressant. And we all know that not everyone needs an antidepressant. And just those symptoms alone almost robbed me of all my dreams. So I was fortunate enough at that time to find a practitioner that was more towards the integrative side. And he did an old time test they no longer do called the TRH stim test. And it's a stress test for your thyroid. And I flunked and had sky high antibodies. And he put me on thyroid hormone replacement. He also did combination T3, T4, which was also unheard of. And, and it's very regional. That was on the West Coast. And of course, when I moved to the East, to the North or the Midwest, that doctor promptly took me off T3. And I'll have to say, for me, it didn't make as much of a difference. I know it does for many of our patients, but imagine just being on that replacement. I went from happy to happier. I went from sleeping 10 hours to 8 hours. And it was like I was given my whole life back and could go on to do what I wanted to do. But sadly, and I'm sure we'll get into it, that was only the tipping point. And I really wish I had known. It took me about a decade to really figure out all the innuendos of what was kind of what obstructed me, what got me worse, and how things culminated almost into a second autoimmune disease.
Wow, that was the story. I think a lot of emails over here, have similar stories. They were all dreadful of going to the doctors. Even after going to the doctors, they were all kind of said that, there was nothing wrong with them, just either go to a psychiatrist or, come back in 6 months and we'll repeat the blood work. And if it shows anything, then you're going to go on the medicine. So I'm sure, it was a scary moment for you, but I'm glad that you're all good and doing great.
Yeah, thanks for that. And that's why I chose my topic for today, is that I really wish I would have known the hardcore biochemistry and the innuendos of that interplay of what we call epigenetics and genetics, because at one point, I developed severe right upper quadrant pain. We were living in a foreign country. My husband is a native New Zealander and made me promise to live abroad with him to experience it as a married couple. And it was a very fruitful journey, but I just knew the healthcare system there, that I didn't want to have the investigation, and they were even wanting to do a liver biopsy and all that. And so we were due to move, and I actually expedited that move. And it was very fortuitous that I found functional medicine, ended up at Mass General in the United States. And the doctors were convinced I had autoimmune hepatitis, which, if you don't know, it carries a 50% mortality if you're not on steroids within 3 to 5 years. So I found functional medicine. I had a mentor take me through the basic approach. And when I went back into the doctor, my numbers had normalized and the ANA was near normal. And, they did the biopsy. We'll talk about other things that went on as we get into the interview, but she was just astounded. And I went to say, well, I went gluten-free. And I just saw that look in her face, like, I'm not even going to bother. I've reversed it. I feel good. I didn't end up on steroids. I didn't develop that. I wasn't ever formally given that second diagnosis, but my ANA, to put it in perspective, was 1 to over 5,000, which is pretty high. And unfortunately, lifelong, it was at that low level that no one worries about, 1 to 40. Don't worry about it. But if your body's attacking the nucleus of your cell, then you should worry about it. You should pay attention. And it was all preventable had I only known and had I only had the right guide.
Absolutely. Well, let's delve into all those things so that people can know, what they can do to get better. So today we're going to talk about the epigenetics and genetics, but those terminologies might not be familiar with a lot of folks. So can you just tell us a little bit more about what do you mean by genetics and epigenetics?
Yeah, great starting point. Epigenetics is really utilizing diet and lifestyle to overcome any genetic mutations. And we're not talking the genes that give you blue eyes or the genes that may govern whether one child has Down syndrome or not. We're talking about the genetics that govern how chemical reactions are carried out in the body. We call that nutritional genomics. And the study of it is to look at the chemical pathways and overriding any mutation, either with the vitamins or minerals, which we call cofactors that are needed, or by giving the end product. And your listeners may have heard the MTHFR mutation, but which you would give methylfolate cautiously. Of course, you don't ever just treat the genetics. We know at the current juncture that epigenetics, which encompasses all diet lifestyle, can override mutations. And this was lovely, very lovely highlighted in the Goody mouse experiment, where they took mice that were predisposed to being obese and they fed them a nutrient-rich diet with methylated, so active B vitamins, and those mice did not become obese. Conversely, they took mice that were not predisposed to being obese and made them obese by, feeding the nutrient poor diet, et cetera. So poor diet. My fear though, and why I love speaking about the nutritional genomics, twofold. One is that our diet and lifestyle and our environment is becoming ever more increasingly toxic. And my worry is eventually, and it may not be this year, it may not be next year, but at some point, I think our toxic environments are going to override our ability to overcome that. And the second point to make, and what I've seen, is that if someone is chronically ill, you had better believe that those genetics that are the genes that are mutated are actually expressing. And so a mutated gene is what we call the genotype, and whether it's expressing is called the phenotype. And so that's where I like to do the deep dive. I have two categories. So we have a lot of high performers like myself that come through the door and say, I want to make sure that my lifespan equals my health span. That's when I'll run the genetics. But again, it's incorporating the genes with the symptoms and lab, all three. You never just treat the genetics. It can be very dangerous. And then if someone's chronically ill. So those are the kind of two categories I like looking at the genetics for.
Awesome. So, well, why don't we delve into the genetics first and tell us like some of the mutations that you see most frequently with people with Hashimoto's?
Yeah, just in general, if I'm able to, I wanted to explain two concepts before the actual genes. The first concept is I always teach any of my patients or online group clients when I'm educating them is that anything that causes inflammation can lead to something called oxidative stress. And first we'll talk about inflammation. So that would be things like poor sleep, stress that's not regulated, toxins, inflammatory foods, nutrients being depleted. So believe it or not, if you're deficient in a vitamin that needs to govern that chemical pathway, that vitamin deficiency can act like a gene mutation, being sedentary, being solitary. So solitary, being alone is like smoking. So, and being seated all day long is like it's worse than smoking. So all these can lead to a fancy term called oxidative stress. And the best way to highlight this is to kind of give the example of when you cut an apple open and it browns, that's oxidative stress. The apple is actually being destroyed, and so can our tissue be destroyed. And what is at the hallmark are things called free radicals. And so there's several that come to mind. One is superoxide, and one is the hydroxyl radical. So we're going to start looking at the interplay between those. And some amount of free radicals are good. That's how we kill off our bacteria and our viruses we're exposed to. And believe it or not, these free radicals are produced when we make energy or ATP. So it's necessary, but it's got to be in that checks and balances. So one of the first thing I'll look at is how do we neutralize superoxide? And we're going to start with SOD or superoxide dismutase. And so it's frequently mutated in people who have autoimmune disease. I don't have the statistics, but I look to it so I know how to support it while we fix the diet and lifestyle.
Wow, that's good. I mean, I'm sure most people have heard those terminologies for the very first time, because we all talk about inflammation, but we don't talk about like how the inflammation happens, especially like, from the genetic levels of, this SOD gene mutation. So you obviously shared that, this oxidative stress, the free radicals are, and SOD enzyme plays a big role. Are there any other enzymes which you look at, for the detoxification along with that?
Yes. So the superoxide will be neutralized or converted by superoxide dismutase to hydrogen peroxide. And so think about, and then that hydrogen peroxide needs to be further distilled down to either water and oxygen. So there's two more pathways involved to kind of break that down. The first one involves glutathione, and ironically, that was kind of my whole issue with some of my medical hiccups that came my way, particularly that last piece where my liver became just very dysfunctional. It looked like I had autoimmune hepatitis. Was that some people, believe it or not, are missing full genes that govern how you recycle glutathione. And that was me. And how it manifested initially was we would travel. We were living abroad, and long haul flights I used to take like the average person, 5 to 7 days. Then I think it's an hour per time zone or whatever, or a day per time zone change or something like that. And it went to 2 weeks, then 3 weeks, then 4 weeks. And I was at a conference, and I'd flown all the way from the Middle East to LA for my first functional medicine conference. And this is karma at play. The person I was talking to happened to work for a company that made glutathione. It's actually one of my favorite types of glutathione, that's liposomal. And he says, "Oh, you must be excited to get back to your kids." I said, "I am. I don't like being away from them, but I'm not looking forward to the 4 weeks of jet lag." And he said, "Oh, go and get some melatonin. Here, take some glutathione." And, I had no idea about the biochemistry or why any of this was going to work. So I started taking it twice a day, and within 3 days, my jet lag was gone compared to 3 to 4 weeks. So it was just to highlight how important for some people. So if you're not able to make glutathione, and how we make it is healthy lifestyle, cruciferous vegetables, unfortunately, whey protein, but for many people, they have the whey protein intolerance. So we don't, that's one I probably push the least. But if you're not able to make it or recycle it, then you can get into this deficient state. And if you're exposed to a lot of toxins, you're going to deplete it as well. So your needs will go up. So glutathione will take hydrogen peroxide and neutralize it to water. So that's beautiful, right? The second enzyme that's required is catalase. It takes that hydrogen peroxide and converts it into not only water, but water and oxygen, both. So it converts it into that. And all of those, like glutathione, requires selenium. So there's vitamins and minerals needed. And one way you can know, so I always like to look at how could you clinically tell if someone's not neutralizing that hydrogen peroxide? Well, think about what we use hydrogen peroxide as women. We dye our hair. So you might have premature graying. And you know what happened to me in my 20s? I started graying. So that should have been my first tip off. And my mom did too. So my mother likely has these mutations as well. Or you have acid reflux, because hydrogen peroxide, it's an acid. So you always look at the clinical clues, and you don't want to mindlessly give glutathione. You can give N-acetylcysteine to form glutathione, but in my case, I do take a small amount, but I'm well versed. So I look at the whole big picture. I measure the exposure. I have people avoid and reduce exposure. So I guess in summary, we've talked about superoxide's a free radical. It's neutralized by superoxide dismutase to hydrogen peroxide, which further gets neutralized to either water via glutathione or water and oxygen via catalase. And symptoms that might be happening is you might have, if you have a lot of that free radical that's not being neutralized, you think about tissue destruction, so joint pain, memory loss, autoimmune issues, et cetera. If you have too much hydrogen peroxide, clinically, you may manifest as early premature graying or acid reflux.
Awesome. I think that was a really, really comprehensive look at all the three things. So basically what you're telling us is that, now with special testing, the genetic testing, we can look at all these three different genes and kind of look at whether, person is deficient, in one or the other gene. Is that correct?
Yeah, or you can look and see if there's a mutation, and then by symptom history and potentially lab, you can see is that gene actually expressing. So I'd love to share a clinical case. It's not, this one's not hypothyroidism, but like how this manifested. So I've worked this forward and backward, meaning I've helped optimize health without the genetics, and then I've looked at it after the fact. So I had a woman come in with rheumatoid arthritis. So think tissue destruction, in this case, joints. And I just took her, I have a 3D process: diet, digestion, detox. It's not that simple, but it's just the core. And there's so much more to it because we incorporate, the mindfulness and the lifestyle, et cetera. And I took her through all this. And one of the things I gave her early on was SOD to see if it would help mitigate while we fixed her. And certainly every layer we unpeeled, from diet to nutrients to fixing her digestion, targeting the microbiome. And she did have a bacteria that was present, in Hashimoto's, it's H. pylori can be associated with it, but it was Klebsiella pneumonia. We treated that. And then I took her through a formal detox. And then because she was only in the United States during the summers and would go back abroad, I gave her all these steps to follow. Didn't hear from her for 18 months. And I said, when she showed up on my schedule again, I said, oh boy, I don't know what I'm going to do if she didn't get better. And she goes, oh, my rheumatoid arthritis, it's like I've never had it. And so she had full resolution and was in this reversal. You can, I guess, never cure it, but she was in remission and had come to me to talk about the genetics because she also had underlying infertility. And when we looked at the genes, sure enough, she had all the classic, the SOD was mutated, her glutathione, I don't believe her catalase was. And one of the other things when we think about detox too is, and that has been associated with hypothyroidism, is exposure to pesticides. And there is a gene that governs that as well. That gene is called PON1 or PON1. So it's even more important for those people to steer clear of inorganic fruits and vegetables. And the other clinical pearl I've learned is, so I look at these and I do tests. So you can actually measure levels of environmental toxins. There are lab companies that will do this for you. One such company is Great Plains Lab, not to tout one or the other. And I've had people who live the cleanest life you can imagine come in with pesticides. And on close examination, it was their water filtration. So you can get it through, this particular patient had worked with me. She ended up initially coming in as Graves. And so we recovered her thyroid from Graves. And unfortunately, she retired about 15 years early because she was so profoundly affected by the initial symptoms. So she was living this healthy life. Every time I worked with her, she's like, God, I feel better and better. I said, pretty soon you're going to be superhuman. And we joked about that. And she was just astounded that she had these high levels. And I said, it's got to be if you're eating clean and some of the pesticides are low, it's got to be water filtration. And so I do have a gentle detox I take people through to lower the levels of those toxins that we can't do anything once they're in the body, but lower them and then avoid. And she extensively researched another water filtration system for her home. And then we retested her water to ensure it was clear. So yeah, that's another gene. I think I snuck in there, the PON1, because the pesticides definitely can affect thyroid function and have been attributed. One thing, it's very interesting. I was looking through the literature to say, is this oxidative stress? Is it causative? They're not showing that in the literature. One thing they found is it definitely compounds thyroid disorders, and they only studied it with selenium. So we're talking just selenium, and that's only a cofactor. I wonder what would happen if they looked at all of the biochemical pathways. And as you know, some of these studies, because they're nutraceuticals, may never happen, but you got to look at the whole big picture, understand the biochemistry, and support patients all along the way, diet, lifestyle, and then give them the gentle support where they need it.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with that. The research studies are lacking and we might not be able to see them in the future also, who knows, because of, the way these studies are designed and, the funding behind them. So it's a very challenging piece, in functional medicine to do these research studies. But going back to the testing piece of it, so a lot of people might have questioned, where do they can get these testing done? So regular labs do not do these genetic testing, right? So it's only special labs who do it, right?
Special labs. So I have two favorites. Would you be okay if I shared?
Absolutely, please.
I love Bob Miller's functional genomic analysis that can only be ordered by a practitioner. There's 19,000 genes. I could never review those in my lifetime, but I like it because it's got such a diverse, such a comprehensive overview. And some genes, we don't know what to do with the mutations, but that helps me in my really chronically ill. And then for the ordinary person I do like the DNA company. So they'll look at the glutathione, the SOD, and some of the key things. And I've been advocating. I haven't gotten back to see. There were a couple they were missing, but a few years back. But they really, because they're palatable, you can actually review that the testing in maybe an hour or two post-consultative, and then come up with the game plan. So that's why I do like both companies for different reasons.
And that's very important because a lot of people, go through some of these, traditional online companies, which has been there, people can order it. They get, big data out of it. But, in reality, the data is useless, as you and me know. Is that because it has to be married with a clinical picture. And some of these companies are actually not even accurate, right? There was a research study that came out that, I don't want to name that particular company, but, it was only 60% accurate, the data from that company, which is almost everybody was buying it, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that the DNA company was very prideful in saying how they actually did clock the null genes, so they could tell you, are you missing the full gene? And some of the other companies were not letting you know that. And I think it's super important to know, because with the glutathione gene, there's two of the three predominant ones for recycling. You can have 0 copies, which is null, so no copies were inherited. And that's my case for 2 of those 3 genes. And my third one is partially mutated. So I'm really behind the 8 ball. You have 1 copy or 2 copies that are of the actual gene, and then whether they're mutated or not is also reported. So that is important distinction, is you want to know if the company is going to actually report no copies of the gene.
Absolutely. Now let's kind of talk about a little bit out, like, because these genes are, a lot of these genes are involved in detoxification, or like, lessening the burdens of oxidative stress. So how does toxins kind of play a role, in Hashimoto's? Let's talk about a little bit about that.
Yeah, so toxins serve in a variety of ways. So let's look at the big overview picture. So you have your the big ones for the thyroid, obviously the environmental, the perchlorate, which is found in water, parabens, or BPA, I should say. And so you want to limit exposure. A lot of people don't even bother to look at. So the only thing you can do is limit exposure. And then if you're being exposed and can't limit the exposure, so that would be more like the environmental air pollution, is you want to then take something to mitigate it. So I have various compounds that I use to lower that. And you want to make sure your vitamins and minerals are up to snuff. So all the things that are important to have your thyroid regulating or functioning normal in formation. So zinc, iodine, selenium, iron. At the top. And so I measure nutrients in everyone, whether I go through a specialty company or just through your regular ordinary lab. I'm looking at those levels and making sure people are optimized. We talk about avoidance of the toxins. One thing too is one thing I learned is that chlorine from your water, so your shower and stuff. So you can get a whole house filter, but you can still get some chlorine there. It probably pays to have a chlorine filter right at the shower head, because the disinfected byproducts of chlorine is even more toxic than the chlorine itself. And which I was shocked to learn that. And our skin is such a large surface area. You're going to get absorption through the skin and just inhaled as well when you're showering. So something to think about if you don't have a whole house filter, but definitely put the chlorine filter on the shower so it's not affecting thyroid function. Also infertility in many of the women that you're looking at. And I worry about that because I was an infertility patient. So we managed to get pregnant naturally both times. It was because I've extensively read, even though I didn't understand functional medicine, I extensively read and put into play some of the things I'm telling. So it was like my own doctor, but how much easier would that have been if someone had just guided me from the beginning?
Absolutely, yes. I think a lot of people are similar way that, they have been to several doctors and they believe in them, and they should rightly say so. Unfortunately, the doctors are not trained, in all of these things. So it's not they're withholding information. They are not even aware of this information which exists out there.
Yeah, there were 2 other things, if you don't mind doing deep dives, 2 other pathways I'd like to talk about with you.
Let's go with it. Yes.
So remember I said hydrogen peroxide is free, superoxide comes down and is neutralized to hydrogen peroxide and has to be cleared. If it's not cleared, it can accumulate in the body. So not only give you gray hair and reflux, but it can bind with iron. And that reaction is called the Fenton reaction, and it forms an even more dangerous, deadly free radical called the hydroxyl radical. And what was interesting as I've been doing this deep dive, people who have high iron, some have issues with iron transport. So there are various genes that govern that, but others have a condition some people may have heard of called hemochromatosis, where you store high levels of iron in the liver. And I was shocked to find out that's about 1 in 200. And for women, you may not have an issue with it until you hit menopause, because you're getting monthly blood loss and keeping the levels down. But as you hit menopause, it may manifest. So it's really looking at, so that's something I've been looking at people, because again, that level of oxidative stress from that hydroxyl radical can lead to tissue destruction, immune dysfunction, et cetera.
Absolutely. Great. I think that was another great information, because as you pointed out, a lot of, females have high iron levels, or they might not even have it. And they they don't know about it until, as you said, they hit the menopause. So very important number to look at, the complete iron profile and have a high index of suspicion, I guess, and doing these testing.
Yeah, yeah. And the last pathway I'd love to, and then we can have some banter back and forth, is superoxide. If it's not neutralized, say there's no SOD and it's just free floating and it gets out of balance because we're exposed to environmental toxins, because we don't have the right vitamins, minerals, nutrients to neutralize it, it can combine with something called nitric oxide, which the abbreviation is NO, or no. And when that happens, so nitric oxide is good because it causes dilation of our arteries and delivers more oxygen to our tissues. So think about in headaches. People who don't have enough may experience headaches. In men, it could be erectile dysfunction, or it could be high blood pressure. So a little bit's good, but if you have excess superoxide and excess nitric oxide, they can combine and form something called peroxy nitrate. And ironically, the abbreviation is ONOO. So you go from no to oh no, and that's very bad. So this is a good way for your audience to remember, is that it's all checks and balances, and some of it you can measure. There are nitric oxide strips you can measure just through the saliva, and I've been experimenting to see, and there are supplements that can increase nitric oxide levels. But one key thing is certainly you're more looking at neutralizing the superoxide and not having an excess, but there's lots of the things that can increase nitric oxide should you be suffering from high blood pressure and erectile dysfunction. Probably not in your audience if they're mostly females, but even migraine, headaches. So, I had the whole conglomerate. So these things all go in hand. So it was not only Hashimoto's, but it was infertility, endometriosis, migraine headaches, the near autoimmune hepatitis. So it's like the whole downstream problems with when you have one illness, you need to work to prevent, especially one autoimmune. The rate is so high to look at develop a second autoimmune.
Absolutely, yes. No, tell us, so let's say, people went to a genetic testing and, they saw these mutations. Now, what specific things they can do? Is it only generalized things about optimizing the diet and the lifestyle things, or there are more specific things? How do you approach, these specific mutations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I look at, you want to look at the history. So if, someone comes in and has that autoimmune disease, and we look at some of the markers, so you can measure their need for glutathione. So if we see on an organic acid test, you can see high levels of toxic exposure and high needs for glutathione, which is measured by a chemical compound called pyroglutamate. And if you're seeing that, then you're gonna say, oh, wow, while we lower their exposure and doing a deep dive into their history, what kind of water do they drink? Are they filtering their air? What products do they use on their face? What do they clean their home with? So we always start with the basics: clean water, air, food, and products, kind of at the top four. And then we may say, hey, are you someone that's going to need a little excess glutathione? Again, I wouldn't just give it. So you can end up, if there's always there's always downstream effects and stuff, but they may need support temporarily. They need a little bit lifelong. And for me, it's a little bit lifelong at this point with all the good diet stuff. And, looking at lab markers too, what vitamins and minerals are to deplete. So you're right, we do start with diet and lifestyle, but all along the way. And I think that's where I get all the results, is very quickly. And I think all of us in it, the beauty of functional medicine is pattern recognition. And so you get in and you recognize the pattern within that person. And I'm very targeted with gentle supplementation right at the beginning, 3 to 5 supplements, nothing fancy. That's very specific to that individual and their symptoms. And we see about a 50% reduction in symptoms in 4 to 6 weeks, faster if someone does everything. And that's a little rare, but I've had 50% reduction in 2 weeks because someone was felt so poorly. She's like, I'm doing everything. And she made it a mission. So I think we should take that seriously. As our lifespan increases up over 80, the risk of even dementia is 1 in 2 people after 80. So you want to look at, and that's all oxidative stress. So it may start as an autoimmune, but down the road, you want to think about what else is going to be being destroyed, what other tissues will be involved.
I think that's great. Yes, like we all have to start with the basics. And I think a lot of people, when they come to see us, they're already on like 10, 20 supplements and they feel, the more you just add more supplements to it. I was like, no, 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 let's reduce the supplements, not add more. Because yes, there are at least 1,000 supplements in the market, but not all of them is good for you. They might be good
Mhm.
for some other person, but not for you. So I think that's great that you shared that, you are also in the same boat at starting with a few supplements which are more specific to that person rather than just bombarding their body with a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I do tell people though, it may feel like as we take them through the protocols, the number will increase, but the goal is ultimately, I have a few foundational ones I use, and then for anyone over 40, there's 3 that I think that most people should probably be on. So we talk about that, including some sort of mitochondrial support and including something for continual environmental, general, meaning it doesn't deplete your other nutrients, general environmental detox support. So
Awesome. Good. Let's change gears and talk a little bit about the gut, especially the microbiome, because we know that the gut is important. A lot of people are talking about it. But this is an interesting question. It's just about the composition of microbiome, or the microbiome changes how your body metabolizes these things in Hashimoto's. So answer that question for us, please.
I'm trying to think, like map this out in my head. 3 things. So you're looking at dysbiosis, so it's imbalance of good to bad, and will affect how you break down and absorb your vital vitamins and minerals. And 2, then you look at the preponderance or incidence of bacteria that shouldn't be there that can serve to be what we call serve to cause something called molecular mimicry, where the body looks at that one bacteria that's not giving you diarrhea, but the body says, hey, the protein of that bacteria, and one, of course, we've already mentioned the H. pylori, looks like the protein within your thyroid. And so then it attacks not only the bacteria, but it cross attacks the thyroid. And by eliminating the particular bacteria, that's why I always tell people I definitely like looking at stool and organic acid tests when we're trying to optimize the microbiome. And then you look at one thing too for immune function, as it applies to Hashimoto's and all other autoimmune disorders is, and I see this as a huge red flag, is the diversity in our diets are completely lacking. So that means the number of, and I have people track, I have a task, TASK method of how to induce and to incorporate the abundant diet. That's what I call it, the abundant diet. And one of the things we have them track is how many different foods do you eat in a week? And I would venture to guess most people are probably the same dozen or so foods. And the goal would be to increase and get 35 or more per week. And why is this important? So our food serves as fuel for our bacteria. Bacteria nibble on that food and release something called short chain fatty acids. And you can measure that in the stool. And so you've got a low number, it can lead to immune dysfunction. So it's going to propagate. So if someone's predisposed, say they have a mother or a father with autoimmune disease or Hashimoto's, and it's just the right number of triggers. So we're looking at not only the nutrients like D and zinc, et cetera, for immune function, but just not having the diversity. And you can measure that by looking at a stool test and seeing what's the imbalance of good to bad. Is there one pathogen that's there that serves as a trigger for our immune system to attack the thyroid? And then what are the level of short chain fatty acids? We also look at other things. So, digestive enzymes. So if you're not breaking down your foods can serve as autoimmune triggers because of the protein content in that food. If it by chance, because if the food is not broken down, the body will create what we call an antigen antibody complex, and it'll circulate. And for some people, it deposits in the brain, some people in the thyroid, and that's where you get the attack. The body says, oh, well, it looked like a blueberry or a piece of chicken, but it's not. And we all know it's multifactorial what affects our digestion too. So it's not only what you eat, but stressors and medications you might take and alcohol intake. Yeah.
Awesome, good. So I think we covered a lot of topics, including, these oxidative stress, these genetic that play an important role into the toxin metabolism. Anything else from the toxin aspect that you want to talk about that we have not spoken about?
I don't think so, because we covered, look at the big four. So start with the clean water, clean air, clean food, clean products, from cleaning to personal, doing the inventories, transitioning across, avoidance. And then, I do use a product for I think most adults probably should be on a low level of something that will bind up the environmental toxins, if not daily, but a few times a week, while they're minimizing exposure. There's a way also to be on it. I'll dose it twice a day for 3 months to lower it if someone's got very high levels. And it's and although I've worked with people not knowing the testing, the sicker you are or the higher performing you want to be, is test, don't guess, and look at the whole big picture: symptom, testing, and then the labs. So.
Yes, I think that's very important, and let's just touch base a little bit about it, why you don't want to do detox on your own, right? Because people might again go out and then do these testing about these genes, and there is a mutation for it. Obviously, they'll Google it up, and obviously somebody will say that, okay, take this supplement if you have this mutation, and that might not be the best thing. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So when we think of detox, and that's even breaking down our ordinary medications. So a lot of people get fearful. Oh, that's a new trend. Well, we detoxify anything we're exposed to on a daily basis. So I'm talking about it from the physiologic standpoint, not the cleanses that are out there that actually can serve a purpose. And what we do is we'll take whatever that toxicant we're exposed to. We're going to call it a toxicant. So it can be a medication, environmental pollutant, parabens, phthalates, et cetera. And it gets broken down into a more toxic byproduct. And then our body will kind of incorporate it into a water-loving molecule so that we can pee, poo, or sweat it out. All right, so we got to get rid of it. And if it gets stuck in that more active metabolite, people can get very, very sick. And some of the things we need to clear it are B vitamins, glutathione, and amino acids. So that's why I always caution, juice detoxes can make people feel good because it puts them in an alkaline state. But if they're so full of toxins, they're going to feel really awful because they don't have the amino acids, which come from protein, to break down those really, really toxic metabolites. So that's why I always say, you want to proceed with caution. And clearly just eating whole foods can make you detox in a good way. And I one time heard a patient, and she said, oh my gosh, you put me on this whole foods diet and I feel worse. So then we had to talk about gently supporting her. It was the first and only time, but I'm like, well, I mean, you got to get to the end point. And that means you really lived unhealthy to feel that bad just from going to a whole foods diet. Now that's the extreme, of course.
Absolutely. I think, those were great parting words in terms of, how people should be working with a professional or doing the detox, and how food itself can be, amazing in helping people to detox. So I think those are great words. Can just tell us people where they can find you, because I'm sure people are looking forward to working with you.
Yeah. So my website's drrajka.com, drrajka.com. I think as one of our bonuses for the summit, I have a 10 days to infinite energy guide, and it kind of is what I teach in the office and in my group online programs all the time. And then I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Dr. Rajka. It's just the DRRAJKA. So I share a lot of Facebook lives, and we've just started a YouTube channel. So I've created a series of videos that are up on YouTube on the 4 words you should never hear your doctor say. Your labs are normal. So that's been very, very popular because it helps people understand what we're looking for when we look at optimal. And then the 1 lab test your doctor may never order. And so I've started doing videos talking about other tests that may be appropriate for some people. So, yeah.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much. That was really, really informational session. I'm sure everybody will love it, and they might have to listen to it twice to get all the information that you shared, but that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for having me on.